Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice Radio. So today, we're looking at the other fossil Pokemon. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We just had a look at Omastar, and I said that could be a bit of a problem. Well, now we're looking at Kabutops, and this could be a little bit of a problem. 140 HP is at least more than Omastar, but for a Stage 2 Pokemon that uses a fossil mechanic, come on, we can do better. Retreat cost of 2 is more than we would like, annoyingly, and the weakness to grass, it means you'll get got by Golisopod that wouldn't otherwise get you, and it means that Dalmise you would usually able to survive a hit and now you can't, but they're about the only two relevant ones for the time being. Being a fighting Pokemon is great, however. You've got Diancie Prism Star to do a little bit of extra damage. You are hitting weakness on Zoroark. In Expanded, you've got strong energy, and you would have access to Brooklet Hill, except this evolves from unidentified fossil. Now, we talked about this properly in the Omastar video a moment ago. We don't need to go into huge detail now, but essentially, this only evolves from unidentified fossil, which is a Pokemon only when it's in play. It cannot be searched out with Professor Round's lecture. It cannot be searched out with Nest Ball. That is a bit of a pain, ladies and gentlemen. It is annoying. But it does mean that you can essentially choose your starting Pokemon because you can't start with this, so whichever other Pokemon you play, you're more likely to start with, if that's a good thing. Really here, ladies and gentlemen, we are just getting overly excited about the ability. Our translation comes from the lovely David Hochmann over at limitlesstcg.com/translations, and it reads, while this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, your opponent cannot play supporter cards from their hand. I know, right? As long as this is active, your opponent doesn't get supporter cards. And some of you might be thinking, hang on a second, Wassy. That sounds a little bit familiar. You'd be right. We've seen this before with Stoutland. Is this any better than Stoutland? I mean, initially, yes, because Stoutland was out running around when fighting decks were big, and that was bad. But also, well, we're hitting weakness here. And we'll talk about this more in a moment, but in Expanded, we've got Maxies' Hidden Ball Trick, which, oh my goodness, makes this a million times better. The problem is, we are still in a game at the moment where supporter cards are absolutely huge. And it's not quite as bad as it's been the last few years. We're all using cards like Oranguru, Makago, Zebstrika nowadays. Which means that some decks, and let's not of course forget Zoroark, it means that some decks can deal a little bit better with not having supporter cards. And it means we can get away with playing fewer supporter cards. But make no mistake about it, this is going to really impact a lot of people. First of all, it means no Guzma. And Guzma Right's really annoying because we saw this with Trevenant. Trevenant blocked item cards when it was in the active, so generally what you would want to do is sometimes play a Guzma so that you could turn your item cards back on. Well, you cannot play a Guzma to get this out of the active because when this is in the active, it blocks Guzma. Escape Rope and Repel, incidentally, would work. I mean, no one's playing Repel, but just as a side note, it totally would work here. So you can get around it, but it's kind of awkward. And the thing is, it's not just Guzma. You've got stuff like Ace Roller, which can pick up and heal your Pokemon. We've got stuff like Faber that your opponent might play to try and disrupt you. But really here, it's stuff like Cynthia, stuff like Lily. It's draw cards. The theory here is very simply you stop your opponent setting up. You put your opponent in a position where they are just plain unable to get rolling. They can't actually set up their side of the board, so they lose. If you're playing against a Blacephalon Naganadel deck, you can look at this and go, well, actually, as soon as I get 2 energy onto a Blacephalon, and 3 energy total on the board, well, I can KO you. Ha ha ha. Alright, and it's true, but you've got to actually get that set up. And Kabutops is stopping you playing supporter cards. So what are you going to do? Now, maybe you go first. Maybe you set up a little bit faster. And you mitigate this. But when I'm talking about cards like this, I always like to say to people, look, just imagine you're playing in a tournament. And do this. Literally, when you're in a tournament, do this. Just look at your hand every turn and ask yourself, how much different would this turn be if I was unable to use my supporters? Because that's what we're talking about here. This does not shut down a deck like Item Lock generally shuts it down. And the big thing is, this has got to be in the active. You cannot sit on the bench and do this. But this can work, and it can be super disruptive. Now, if we go back to Stoutland didn't exactly see a huge amount of play. It saw a bit of play here and there, and it saw some play with the Raichu from Burning Shadows, which paralyzed, and it was kind of paralysis while making sure that your opponent isn't able to play supporters. But Stoutland wasn't amazing. Stoutland wasn't this card which shaped the metagame. So there's an argument that Kabutops won't be either. And if we have a look at the attack here, it's not amazing. Fighting double colourless, so you can use double colourless, which is nice. And it does 80 damage, plus 20 to 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon. It's fine. I mean, look, it is better than Stoutland's attack, I do believe that. And you are hitting for weakness, and against something like a Zoroark, for instance, you add a choice band and you're hitting 220 with the weakness, you're essentially getting a one-hit KO on Zoroark while making sure that for the entire game they're not allowed to play supporters. But then again, Zoroark does have trade. And the thing to remember about Kabutops is, you are locked into this attack. If you want to use Kabutops, you've got to have it active. When we looked at Omastar earlier today, I said, well, you can play a 1-1 Omastar line, pop it on the bench, and then your opponent doesn't get items. Cool. You can't do that with Kabutops. You've got to be in the active. And that limits your choices. It means you've got to attack. And it's not the best attacker ever. The attack is fine, but it's not amazing. It's moderately expensive. And please bear in mind that you're relying on stuff like double colourless energy. And if your opponent starts using Enhanced Hammer and stuff like that to get rid of it, obviously they can't use Faber, but they can use stuff like Enhanced Hammer, you might find yourself unable to attack for a few turns and give your opponent a chance to get set up. But where Kabutops really steps into its own and potentially becomes a problem is in the expanded format with Maxies. Now, I did say in my Omastar video, I'm going to bring you a Maxies video. That is coming tomorrow. You can have your full Maxies discussion tomorrow. But essentially, in the expanded format, I can use Maxies to get a turn 1 Kabutops. And just so you know how easy that is, we've all seen Archie's Ace in the Hole getting a turn 1 Blastoise over and over again. It literally won the World Championships. That's how consistent it can be. And if you get a turn 1 Kabutops, your opponent has no supporters for the entire game. So maybe in Standard, your opponent plays Blacephalon Naganadel, and they get a couple of Naganadel, and they start rolling, and they get a couple of Sightseer in the first couple of turns to get their energy in the discard, and then they beat you. That ain't happening in Expanded. And remember what I said, if you play something like 4 Tapu Koko, and 4 Unidentified Fossil, you have to start Tapu Koko, which means if you hit the turn 1 Maxies, you will have a free Retreater. Because there's no way you can not have a free Retreater, because that's the only basic Pokemon you're playing that you can start with. And this is what makes it so good. In Standard, this is a good card with a good ability, and it's going to see some play. But I have the same worries I had with Stoutland. Bit too inconsistent, and remember, Unidentified Fossil does not help. I'm not loving the consistency, and I'm not loving the attack, especially the cost, and I do think it can be beaten. But in the expanded format, if you go first and drop a Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick, and you get a turn 1 Kabutops in the active, so your opponent has 0 supporters for the entire game, it doesn't matter how bad the attack is. You will win the vast, vast majority of those games. Again, go into a tournament and try thinking every game, can I win this without supporters? Look at your opening hand and think what you can do without supporters. In Standard, the fact that it's not a great attack, The fact that you've got to take a turn or two to evolve up, and the fact that everyone's using stuff like Makago, Zeb Striker, and Orangaroo means that this can be beaten. It will be a nice little rogue deck, but it will probably never be sensational. But in the expanded format with Maxies and the fact that you can get this turn 1 going first, it is a huge, huge problem. In the standard format, I'm giving this 3 Wassies. It's a fun little rogue deck. It's lovely. But in the expanded format, it's a 5 Wassie card. It's so good, it is literally going to get Maxies banned. And I mean that very sincerely. This will get Maxies banned in the expanded format. But that's a discussion for tomorrow. For today, ladies and gentlemen, I want to hear what you think about this card. I want you to go nuts, and I, of course, want you to be nice. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at The Wassie, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that malarkey, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do that. I'd be rather grateful. And do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassiePlays for some more Wassie action. But by far the most important thing, as always, is to look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.